Is it possible that in the time of Tartaria there was a public aerial transport system that made use of etheric technologies? Are many of these technologies left over and rediscovered after the mud flood? Are these zeppelins, dirigibles, hot air balloons remnants of a prior mode of transportation? And this is the history that they leave us with. Many depictions of hot air balloons, ships, okay, Tartarian building, even flying shoes, being comical, mocking us, and again, all sorts of different designs for these hot air balloons, but they want to sell the story that these are the first time that they invented these weren't into the late 1700s. That the ancients didn't think of this technology, that it wasn't until the Montgolfier brothers, where I guess they started in paper making and then somehow got into flying machines. But what doesn't make sense about all this is that on the hot air balloons website itself, it says that hot air balloons were used to create the Nazca lines in Peru, and that was 1500 years ago. So if you think about it, and also, I mean, in China, 220 AD, and it was used for military purpose, so why would it take over 1,000 years for it to be used in Europe again? And I think that this is where the cover-up is happening, is that they're trying to act as if the ancients didn't possess this technology. Well, what if in Tartaria, before the mud flood, they possessed these ancient flying machines, or this technology that goes way back, and this technology was re-engineered, redeveloped, and over time they developed these efficient flying machines known as dirigibles that, and almost famously as the Zeppelin, that would dock. This is the Empire State Building that would dock and charge, or it would get moored by a mooring cable. This ancient technology used ether, atmospheric static electricity, and these stations would collect it. These ancient Tartarian buildings would collect this energy and recharge these flying machines. This must have been the very first goal of many ancient civilizations. If you can build intricate buildings that serve as ether collecting stations, then it's not far-reached to consider that they developed some sort of flying machine that ran on energy it collected. Even the Vedas speak of advanced flying machines of the past. Many ancient cartographic maps are extremely accurate even to this day. Is it possible, just as with the Nazca lines, that the ancients figured out how to create aerostats, or flying vehicles that can move slow enough in order to see and record landmasses from a high altitude? 300 to 500 years ago, there was an advanced civilization that we don't learn about in history. Our entire timeline has been completely convoluted by our current controllers. We don't know exactly what happened to the civilization. Did they disappear after some sort of cataclysm? There seems to have been a comet involved somehow, and we've gone over some theories in other Tartaria Explained videos, but it's possible that there was a global aerial system that connected these civilizations, and this knowledge has been suppressed from history books. Old world cities such as New York, Paris, Belgium, Rome, and even San Francisco have similar buildings that could have served as docking and charging stations for dirigibles and other flying machines. Within the last 200 years, after the mud flood, many of these cities were empty, and the controllers of the New World began migrating children from around the world into these cities, and feeding them stories in place of truth in public schools. Could this be why we are shown these strange photographs where the cities look completely empty, as if these pictures have been set up? And why was there such an abundance of orphan trains in those days? This is the time after the mud flood, where we found these cities and we found the leftover technology that this advanced civilization left over. The survivors of the cataclysm who found these cities became familiar with the technology and began to re-engineer it, such as electricity and air travel. In old photos of the exhibitions of the world, you can see some of these technologies. These crystal palaces could have served as aerial transport centers in the past. The height and length of these buildings, many of them train stations, are just unreasonably high to house solely a mode of transportation that is so low to the ground. I've seen a couple videos talk about the vanilla skies. My take is, we can assume that the builders of these architectures are also the ones who mastered electricity in flight. This advanced civilization was pre-mudflood. If you've seen the pictures of the Zeppelin attached to the Empire State Building, you can clearly see that there's a transport system where passengers are exiting from within the blimp, not from the cabin below. I mean, just check out what it was like. Within one of these, they were much more spacious, and sure, they may have been slightly slower, but these were much more cost-effective. It's said that Zeppelins used helium for flight and had diesel engines that could burn coal. But what if these machines were also designed to charge with atmospheric aether energy that has been collected through one of these docking stations, a metallic tower? Maybe they used some sort of static electricity in order to levitate the balloon. The name aerostat seems to support this theory, as the balloons themselves were not static. The common answer is, aerostats are so named because they use aerostatic lift, which is a buoyant force that does not require movement through the surrounding air mass. But I can't help but wonder. These flying machines and other technologies of this time pose a threat to the ruling class, and we have the story of the robber barons, these wealthy industrial families that shaped our society for their own profit. They suppressed all knowledge of free energy. They brought in the prohibition as a means for removing alcohol as a fuel source. School systems influenced to create worker-minded humans. Removal and suppression of any new science of free energy, to trap one in a dead system or rule. Kenneth Price has some great work on this subject. The oil industry purposely seek to destroy all modes of efficient and cheap travel, redesigned our roads, engines, and vehicles to rely on their petroleum products, creating a monopoly on the fuel industry through unfair business practices, not only through propaganda and false attacks, but through capitalizing off of natural resources. The electric Riker engine was far superior to any gas engine at the time in the 1900s. It didn't have to shift, and it could drive very smoothly at a great speed. It won many races for its time, and just imagine if they just kept at it and continued to develop these engines. There were others too, like diesel, that could run off of vegetable oil, but the oil companies who controlled the government, and still do, passed a prohibition just to remove these engines as competitors. They had cars that could literally just run off of alcohol, like the Stanley Steamer. The gas engines were overcomplicated and failed in many situations. They used piston engines, which is a lesser technology. They were more bulk, and fuel was more expensive. There were other power systems that were deliberately forgotten, and the reason is they multiplied the energy they released during combustion, which led to increased fuel mileage. These oil companies had a part in both the destruction of the Titanic and the Hindenburg. Big Oil hated steam, and the Titanic was a steam marvel. It could run off of cheap coal and was extremely efficient. The Titanic broke into two different pieces straight down the middle, and the pieces were found 2 miles apart. They covered this up with the movie, of course, and they successfully removed the steam marvel and others from being developed in the future. We all know the story of the Hindenburg and how they said, oh, blimps are dangerous, so that one event literally destroyed that entire industry. These anti-gravity machines that weighed 500,000 pounds, they would be released from a mooring line, they didn't need power, and just through push, they could travel. A modern jet-powered system needs 5 times more fuel and weight. And that's just to compensate for it losing weight. The Hindenburg was much more efficient. 18 million miles of surface in 1 year, 1 year in operation before the disaster. It had 44 transatlantic flights that were successful. Supposedly this is just a test trial. Very fuel efficient, and if they would have kept developing these technologies, imagine what we would have now. A free aerial transport system, maybe? The Hindenburg was also political. You see the Nazi sign on the tail, and it was named after a political leader, so there was kind of a symbolism to this destruction. There was many bomb threats, and the lead engineer of the Hindenburg said that it was sabotage. The Hindenburg had plans for using hydrogen instead of helium, which would have been much more cost-effective. This could have been one of the main reasons it was taken down. They never show the part where it starts burning, you only see it afterwards once it's in flames. And they just so happen to have 22 different photographers right on set right when this is happening. Only 35 people were lost during this event, but yet, they say it's so dangerous. How many people die from airplanes and cars?
So, car crashes happen in the millions every year, many of them involving alcohol or cell phones. Yet nobody's rushing to ban cars or cell phones or beer. There is a semi-lengthy list of airship crashes listed on the Wikipedia, but it's still short enough to where you could examine every crash. Whereas car crashes are in the billions. Same goes for boats. There are thousands of crashes each year, but there are multiple fatalities, and yet we still use them. This to me indicates that safety is not the true motive for banning this mode of transportation.
They just didn't want these technologies to compete with their industries, and they wanted to be the main fuel source of the future. Just think about how much money big oil makes nowadays. Even after their fake World War, which they funded oil to both sides, World War I made billions off of aircraft fuel, which was gasoline. In the modern day, you can imagine that billions of gallons of gasoline are being used. Not only that, plastics, pharmaceuticals, the modern oil industry is making trillions. This is why JP Morgan actively shut down Nikola Tesla. Free energy would mess up their debt system that they were trying to impose on every human being. Oil waste is extremely toxic. They just turn it into even more products that are used by every vehicle today, like tires and paint, and all sorts of stuff. So what's the big idea here? What do we think's going on? Well, from what we've gathered, the old world was much more advanced than we were made to believe. Perhaps not in the way that we imagine high tech nowadays. In fact, it seems that we've lost more than we've gained. A world in which flying machines were commonplace and people could fly more freely does seem fantastical, but it's important to remember on whose authority is it simply fantasy.